Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to M.M.0.S Stories. It's your host, Ella Favela, and I'm thrilled to present the second episode of a series I've been diligently crafting since the channel's relaunch, In Her Own Words. This collection of vlogs serves as a platform for survivors of domestic abuse to share their own experiences. As a survivor myself, I understand the difficulty of sharing one's story to the world. It's disheartening to witness the media and the public often spotlighting the perpetrators rather than the victims. They sensationalize the crimes, delve into the abusers' backgrounds, and speculate about motives and mental states. But what about those who suffered at their hands? What about their narratives, their emotions, their aspirations? What about their side of the story? This segment is my response to that question. By inviting survivors to articulate their stories through me, I aim to empower them to speak up, reclaim their agency, and embark on a journey of healing. Moreover, I seek to educate society about the harsh realities of domestic abuse, its signs, effects, challenges, and the available resources. I wish to underscore that survivors are not merely statistics. They're resilient human beings, deserving of dignity. For each episode, a different survivor will share their story privately with me in a safe and supportive environment. Afterwards, I'll edit and upload the video with their consent, respecting their privacy and anonymity. These stories, presented with edits from a first-person perspective, encapsulate the essence of In Her Own Words. These narratives, often overlooked by mainstream media, hold immense validity and significance. They deserve to be told with dignity and to be heard with compassion. Please join me on this journey of listening, learning, and healing. Let's collectively support the brave survivors sharing their stories and help to raise awareness about the pervasive issue of domestic abuse and how we can work together to bring it to an end. As you lend your ears to this story, please keep in mind that this could be any woman that you know. If there's skepticism still there for you, I encourage you to ask the women in your life if they have any stories to share, and, more importantly, to listen very carefully when they tell you that they do. We hold the power as a society to reshape the perceptions of this issue and to empower survivors by providing them a safe space in which to articulate the harrowing experiences that went unnoticed by society. Before we delve into today's story, I must offer a heads up. It covers sensitive and graphic topics that may not be suitable for everyone. This story dives into addiction, abuse, and violence, and it may be distressing for some viewers. If you are currently dealing with these issues or you have a history of trauma yourself, please take care of yourself first. You can choose to skip this video, watch it with someone you trust, or seek professional support if needed. We've provided resources and links for you in the description below, and I encourage you to call the local authorities should you find yourself in immediate danger. I share these stories not to sensationalize the darker aspects of human nature, rather to shed light upon them and to learn from them. Discussing these matters can help us to break the silence and the stigma surrounding them, empowering us and others to heal and grow. By creating art inspired by these stories, we can choose to transform pain into beauty and darkness into light. Consider yourself warned, and please, proceed with caution. I apologize for today's extended introduction, but I felt the context both necessary and crucial for your consideration. Now, without any further delay, it's time to pour yourself a cup of coffee, pick up your paintbrushes, and settle in. It's my honor and privilege to present to you In Her Own Words, Volume 2, April. It started when I was a teenager, when I took that first bump. I'll never forget that feeling, how invincible I felt. It was like filling a broken part of me that I still hadn't figured out yet. Where that broken piece comes from, I'm still trying to figure it out. Maybe it was the fact that I was adopted because my addict birth mom didn't want me. Maybe it was the that happened when I was 14. Or maybe it was just my up way of thinking. Either way, I would do anything and everything to get that fix I so craved. To heal the absolute emptiness I felt. I didn't care who I hurt along the way. Who I had to steal from. I did what I had to do. It was shameful, and the guilt I felt was unprecedented. To me, it didn't matter. I fucking needed it, and nothing was going to stop me from getting it. This went on through my younger teen years. I was miserable. I was suicidal. I completely lost who I was. I was using as well as daily. I had a $2,000 a week habit. Looking back on it now, I'm like, what the April? $2,000 a week? Really? Yeah, really. It was insane. I failed school horribly. I was the family disappointment. Everyone around me watched as if I was in a black and white movie. They watched me silently destroying myself. My parents watched this child they'd adopted with so much love turn into an absolute shell of who and what she was. They tried giving me tough love. They tried everything they could to get me back, to just love me back to life. That's the thing, though. I didn't give a fuck about myself enough to accept that love I so desperately wanted. I didn't know how to accept it. Like I said, it was my brain's fucked up way of thinking. It's the trauma. It was suffocating me. I needed to hit my bottom, and I did. December 5th of that year, I tried to take my life. I ended up in the psych ward at the hospital in a room with nothing. My wrists were stitched up and so painful from the horrible thing I tried to do. But even in that moment, I just wanted to get high. And that's when I knew, in that precise moment, that I needed help. I knew I would die if I didn't get help. I remember calling my mom and begging her to take me far away. I didn't want to do this anymore. We cried and sobbed because I couldn't understand why this hurt so much. The next day, I was on my way to a rehabilitation center. I arrived more scared of the unknown than I'd ever been. But also, a little bit hopeful that maybe I could finally gain sobriety. I did it. I was clean for more than a few days. I was eating. I was learning tools to help me stay sober. I walked out of there with 91 days sober. I'd never felt so good but scared at the same time. It was terrifying going back home to where all the pain had started. The same places, the friends who all enabled me, and I enabled them too. But who was I to cast blame on them? They were in as much pain as I was, and I prayed for their comfort. I started out strong. I returned to school, and my very first day I got on the bus that would take me there. I remember getting on, and there was this beautiful man sitting in the back. His black hair fell over his eyes, and when he looked up at me, his eyes were blue and just stunning. I couldn't help but notice him, and the thing is, he noticed me too. I was even more excited when I realized he was getting off at the same stop to go to the school I was going to. He saw me get off the bus as well, and I saw him smile. He ran out ahead of me and opened the door for me and flashed a smile again, and I was smitten. He asked me out 2 days later. It was young love, the kind of love that takes you somewhere else entirely. Being young adults, we had a lot of sex, and when my period was almost 2 months late, I realized I needed to take a test. It was positive. I was terrified. Was I ready to be a mom? Was he ready to be a dad? Telling my mom and dad was hard. The shame on my parents' faces was enough to break me into a million pieces. But as the pregnancy progressed, I came home one day to a crib set up in my room for our daughter. My parents had bought her a crib. My water broke in a movie theater watching a horror movie with my boyfriend. I'll never forget the pure shock and excitement on his face. Off to the hospital we went. 10 hours later, I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. She was and still is our whole life. She was 8 pounds of pure beauty. But we didn't know what we were doing. We were young parents and stressed with a newborn. It eventually failed. It all fell apart. We ended things. It was very painful. I started drinking to mask the pain of failing at this relationship. I swore, though, I would never touch drugs again, as if drinking was somehow better. I decided it was time for me to do better for our child, and I stopped drinking all on my own. A few years went by, and I felt so stuck and so lost again. I started seeing multiple men and started going through a hoe phase, just to help with the immense loneliness I felt, I guess. I never loved any of these men. I was just so unlucky in love. Then it happened. I stepped into an appointment for school, and there he was. Tall, dark, and so handsome. He had a smile like Joseph Gordon-Levitt. This is the man that would destroy me in just a few short years, and I didn't even know. He noticed me and said, "You look bored," and handed me a newspaper. I blushed. We made eyes at each other the whole time. When it was time for me to go, he stopped me, sat me down, and asked for my number. I gave it to him happily, giddily. He said, "I'll call you, sweet thing." I nodded and blushed. A month went by. No call. No text. Nothing. This should have been my first red flag. He eventually called, saying how sorry he was. He'd had a rough month. When the truth is, he was actually still dating another girl. I just didn't find that out until later. Right from the start, there was love bombing, but he was so narcissistic that he always just told me what I wanted to hear. He had a huge drinking problem as well. I never really took it seriously. I just thought he liked to relieve his stress with a beer or two. The first time he punched a wall, it was inches from my head. This was while he was drunk. I was shocked, and I couldn't believe what had just happened. It only got worse from there. One night, he was drunk, and I came home, and he had a friend with him, and they were doing the worst possible thing for my sobriety. He invited me to sit with them, and I said no. He told me to get my ass over here and stop being an He didn't care about my triggers or my sobriety. That night, he held a knife to my throat, and he made me do a bump of with him. The torture. The fear I felt with that knife at my throat was indescribable. I'll never forgive him for that. My sobriety was so important to me, and he just didn't give a This went on for months. He took my self-esteem that I'd worked so hard to build in rehab. He destroyed it, and I let him. I cried myself to sleep every fucking night. I was so scared he was going to kill me. I eventually shut myself off completely. The only person I was allowed around was him. If I wasn't around him, he would question why. If the answer wasn't good enough, he'd smack me as hard as he could. Eventually, I became pregnant with his child. But even then, he would accuse me of our daughter not being his. He made me lose my home because of his drug habits and drinking, and we had no money. I became homeless at 4 months pregnant. The stress this put on my body caused me to deliver my daughter almost 2 months early. He showed up to the birth of our daughter drunk. He didn't think about me or his child. After realizing that, he did decide to try and change for the better. He quit drinking and became a hands-on dad. It was a change I'd always longed for. I had a family, and he was trying. It unfortunately didn't last long. He'd started acting strange, and money went missing that I couldn't explain. I confronted him about it, and he smacked me and told me to mind my own business. So the abuse just started again. Around this time, I started seeing text messages from other girls that he used to know back home in Nova Scotia, where he was from. I just didn't ask him about it because I knew it would end up in another bruise to my body or another insult. We eventually ended up getting married, which is by far the worst mistake I have ever made in my whole life. I still, to this day, couldn't tell you why I married him. I think it was the longing for a family I never really had. We eventually ended up moving into our own place. This is where it goes bad. He started smoking. Remember all those times I said money went missing? Yeah. He was buying, and then he started buying. I feel so stupid to this day for not realizing what he was doing. I should have known. Our poor daughter was witness to all of this, and to this day, I am so angry at myself for letting her see any of it. The pandemic started, and I was stuck 24/7 in the house with him while he was abusing meth and fentanyl. There were nights when he would scream at me, saying I was cheating on him, that I'd hidden cameras all over the house watching him. He was paranoid and delusional to the point where I didn't sleep. I was so scared. He kept the lights off in the house all the time, just to try to catch me sneaking around. That's meth, though. Makes you feel things and think things and see things that aren't really happening. One day, it got so bad that I was about to call my mom, and he grabbed my phone out of my hand. Unbeknownst to him, he ended up pocket dialing my mom, and she heard everything. She heard him shove my head into a pillow, trying to suffocate me while my daughter watched. He ripped my nose ring out of my nose, and I was bleeding, and he threw me into a wall, threatening to throw me out of our 2-story house. My mother heard all of this, and she never hesitated. She called the cops. When he found that out, he ran out the back door and jumped the fence to avoid them. I was terrified, crying and bleeding, and get this, he had the nerve to text me and say, "Get the blood off your face and arm." He was scared he would go to jail for assault. And of course, I listened to him because I was terrified. He never once thought about what he had just put me or our daughter through. My mom ended up talking to the cops. They wanted her to bring me home to her house because of how scared I was. They eventually caught up with him, and he was ordered to stay away from the house. The next day, the same cops came and brought me to the courthouse to get an emergency protection order, or EPO, against him. This lasted for a year. During that year, I decided to go back to him, and I did this many times. I made many excuses for him, and I enabled him for many, many years. I think the last straw for me, though, was his saying that he was going to set my house on fire with everyone in it, including my daughter. I had enough. He threatened our child, not just me, and that was something I absolutely could not abide by. Because of the EPO, he was asked to leave the house we once shared together. He was not allowed around me or my child. I can't even begin to tell you how many holes he left in my walls. I can't even begin to explain the damage he did or what he put me through. But here comes the good part of this story. Now comes all the healing. Now comes all the messy healing. One of the hardest parts of the story, because healing's one of the hardest parts about being an addict and being in and getting out of violent relationships. Did you know it takes an average of 7 attempts to leave an abusive relationship? It took me 5 to fully leave mine. After getting out of this relationship, there was a trauma bond there, and what a trauma bond does is it makes you have this unhealthy attachment to your abuser, which is exactly what happened to me. I was constantly defending him and what he did because of his trauma. And see right there, that's an example of trauma bonding. I wasn't looking at the bigger picture. I wasn't seeing all the bad things that happened. I started to isolate myself and I got very depressed, and the anxiety that came with it was absolute hell. I started going to NA, Narcotics Anonymous, to help with the cravings and the triggers I was feeling. My sobriety was starting to waver a bit, and I knew I needed to do something about it. NA was that lifeline that made me feel almost human again, like I wasn't alone in this hell I was in. The people there are some of the most incredible people I've ever had the privilege of meeting. I was really hesitant. NA scared me because I was scared to tell people what I'd been through. But as time went on, I realized that me and these people had a lot more in common than I'd ever thought. We shared together, we cried together, and we supported each other in ways I didn't even know were possible. NA still plays a huge role in my life to this very day. I've now become a sponsor, and I help others that need just that little bit of encouragement. I also discovered therapy, more specifically, trauma therapy. Starting therapy was very instrumental in my life. It was also a very scary thing to do. I started learning techniques to help myself through my panic attacks and anxiety. We started doing EMDR therapy, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a series of fast eye movements, for example, following someone's fingers for a period of time, and it helps the brain to process your traumatic memories. It's proven to be very helpful for me, and it still is to this day very helpful for me. I started noticing that the nightmares I was having were getting very intense and very scary. I would wake up in a pool of sweat. Sometimes I would wake up crying and even screaming. I started to notice I was becoming very sensitive to loud noises, like the slamming of doors or traffic on the road. Police sirens would send me into a panic attack, and I was constantly watching over my shoulder. I was afraid someone was going to kill me or that he would come back and try to finish the job. It got to the point where I wasn't leaving my house very much. I was constantly on edge and very fearful. It was starting to affect my life in the worst ways possible. I knew this wasn't normal behavior and that I needed help. I decided to start seeing a psychologist as well. We did some tests and talked through it, and by the end of it, I was diagnosed with CPTSD, OCD, severe depression, and severe anxiety disorder. No wonder I was feeling the way I was. I've been in therapy for about 2 years now, and let me tell you, it's done wonders for me. My life is completely different now. I'm here to tell you that I'm walking proof that you can leave an abusive relationship. You can do this. It's scary. I know it is. I never thought I would leave, but I did. I'm currently in school taking addiction studies and trying to make a difference in the world. I realized that I couldn't wallow anymore and be scared of everything and everyone. My mental health and my ex were not going to control my mind anymore. I was done with that stage of my life. I started focusing on my daughter and myself for once, and it felt great. The freedom that came with it, I know he can't hurt me anymore. It's empowering to feel that way because I've become quite the strong and independent woman. I want my kids to see that I never gave up, even when I wanted to. That's why I wanted to tell this story. It's for anybody out there that thinks they can't do this, because you absolutely can. There is so much more life after domestic abuse. This part of my life is called happiness. I met my current boyfriend, and let me tell you, he's amazing. He doesn't hurt me. He doesn't do drugs. He hardly drinks. And most importantly, he loves me. This is the part I thought would never happen for me. I thought I was far too damaged for any man, but turns out I'm not. It's been a challenge accepting love after abuse, but I'm working on it. My man works on it with me. He's patient, and I can't even begin to tell you how many times he's told me that he's proud of me and that he's here for me to lean on him. That's what love is. True love. Love isn't abuse. Love isn't mental, sexual, or physical abuse, and love is not supposed to hurt you like it hurt me. Please don't forget that. To anyone out there struggling right now, take a stand for yourself. Don't let any man or woman tell you you're not good enough, because, sweetheart, you are so good and you're so loved. Don't let anyone talk down on you or make you feel like you aren't worthy, because that's the beautiful thing about life. We're all worthy and loved. And most importantly, we're not alone. You're not inadequate. You are a beautiful piece of this life and this earth. For anyone that's gone through trauma, don't let it define you. Learn from it and move on, because, sweetheart, I promise there are so many good things out here waiting for you. I'm so happy to share this part of my life with everyone. I'm hopeful that if I can help even one person, my job will be done. My dad always said something wise to me. If a man wants to be with you, he will, but how does he treat his mother? How does he treat his family? How does he treat the people around him? Please take that advice and run with it, because if he doesn't treat people with respect and kindness, he likely won't treat you that way either. Never give up, because you are important. In this whole universe, you are important. And I love you. And thank you for listening to my story. I'd like to thank my friend April for having the incredible strength and grace to share her story with us today. I am proud to attest to her personal growth and success over the years, and she truly inspires me when things feel impossible in my own life to this day. One thing I wanted to briefly touch on before we end this episode is the fact that gender-based violence during the height of the COVID-19 lockdown in Canada was more severe and more frequent, according to the first national survey of those who worked with sexual assault and domestic violence survivors during the pandemic. Abusers took advantage of the conditions created by the pandemic to increase control over their victims, using isolation at home as a tool to ramp up violence, using information about the virus to exert control, or monitoring and controlling access to technology to limit the amount of help that a victim was able to access. When you couple that with substance use, you have a disaster waiting to strike. While I don't have the time remaining in this episode to explore the nuance of these truths much further, I invite you to check out my previous videos for helpful insight and practical advice on how to safely leave your abuser behind for good. If you would be interested in an upcoming deep dive on the shadow pandemic that was created by the COVID-19 lockdowns, I would be happy to explore that for you. Leave your interest in the comments below if that's something that you'd be into watching. The painting I've been working on today is a very special commission for my dear friend Kriss. Kriss has been on the waiting list for a kidney transplant for a very long and difficult couple of years, during which we affectionately named her dialysis machine Jason. We treated Jason a lot like a shitty boyfriend during that time, and we made a lot of jokes at his expense, but when she finally got her transplant, we named her new kidney Ricardo, and she broke up with Jason via an incredibly hilarious Facebook post where we all made breakup puns for probably a few days longer than we should have, and celebrated the fact that our dear friend would have a long and stable future with us here Earthside. So, as a commemoration, we landed on this neo-traditional tattoo-style portrait of Ricardo to hang on her wall. I'm currently not finished with it, but I'm sure I will use some combination of my usual watercolor, gouache, Posca pen, India and acrylic inks, and either gold, silver, or copper leaf. It is presented on 9x12 inch 300 GSM cold-pressed block, and while there will be no prints of this piece, don't fret. There's lots of ways you can hang my art on your walls, including commissioning your own unique work, purchasing a pre-made original painting, or buying a print. I do have some limited print stock remaining right now. They are 9x12 inches on archival quality paper, and they go for $35 Canadian each, or 2 for $50. I ship for free across Canada, but I also ship worldwide. I would also like to quickly remind you that I'm still hosting a giveaway on my Instagram where the 100th follower will receive a free painting shipped anywhere in the world, absolutely free of charge. Go ahead and follow me there, as well as all my other social platforms. They're up on the screen right now, as well as clickable down in the description for you below. I tend to be the most active on my Instagram story, but I do exist and post everywhere else as well, so please tell a friend to join us, and I can't wait to see you there. We actually just passed 500 subscribers right here on YouTube yesterday. I would like to thank you all sincerely for joining us on this ride. We have officially checked 2 out of 3 major boxes for my goals for this channel. We are just a few months in, and there is so much more yet to come. 2024 is shaping up to have some incredible content, and I am truly just so grateful for the opportunity to be here with all of you today. I'd also like to thank our producer, Chuck Enzo, for his endless hard work and devotion to this project. He is one of the most talented in the business, and quite frankly, this program would not exist without him. So thank you, Chuck, for a very successful first few months of M.M.0.S stories, and thank you all for being here with us. I can't wait to see where the new year will take us all. Thank you again for joining us today. If you got some value out of what you heard, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and also touch on the notification bells so we don't miss each other in the future. Remember, one day you will die. But for now, live well. Ciao for now.